It's really a tremendous chus once again to participate in the Vayichan program, and I thank all of those who were involved in organizing and putting together all the phenomenal details for this beautiful evening of Limud HaTorah together. So I'm going to talk today just a little bit about our experience of Talmud Torah and the simcha of learning Torah. As we know, Simchas Torah is the time when we're all supposed to celebrate our connection and our relationship that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and more specifically, with His Torah. There are so many psukim that we say throughout our davening. Sas anochi alim rasecha kemotze shalal rav. Toras Hashem temima meshivas nafesh. Hanechemadim mizahav umipazrav. The Torah is considered to be more exciting to us than any other thing that we can be excited about in the world. Ki heim chayenu va'orech yamenu uvahem nehege yomam v'layla. The Torah is our heart. It's our lifeblood. It's the essence of what a Jewish person is meant to be all about. Kihi mesos chayenu. And that's why it's so important that we use this opportunity of Simchas HaTorah to think about what that excitement needs to be and what our relationship with Torah is really all about. There's an amazing letter of the Chazon Ish. It became a famous letter because the Chazon Ish really gives us a perspective of what he believes is the experience of the Lomed HaTorah. And I feel like the Chazon Ish is describing himself. Although he wrote the letter for the public, the Chazon Ish really in some way is describing himself. And he says, Amnam, Ha'ish hazocha liyadiyas HaTorah, a person who has the opportunity to master and to have some kind of kinyan in Torah, hu holech ben anashim, he said this person travels the world and has experiences like all other human beings, v'nidme la'adam haroeh le'einayim kiven adam. If I encounter this individual, I get the feeling, I get the sense as if they're the same as everybody else. Avol be'emes, says the Chazon Ish, the truth really is that he is a malach hagar im b'nei temusa. Really, this person is an angel. He's a malach who happens to be living in our midst. V'chai chaye atzilos, he is living an amazing life that is so sublime, that is so transcendent, that is so otherworldly. Umuromem al kol bracha utihila. So you have an individual who's camouflaged, who is in some way disguised as a human being. But says the Chazon Ish, once we engage in the experience of Talmud Torah, we then give ourselves the opportunity to be elevated to the status of malachim. And that is an amazing feeling that we need to have. I've always been moved, I've always been inspired by the comment of some of our great chachamim to a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. The Mishnah writes in Pirkei Avos that Asara sheyoshim ve'oskim HaTorah, if you have 10 people who are sitting and learning Torah, Shechina shruya beinehem. The Shechina will be present as they are learning the Torah. How do we know? Because the pasuk says in Tehillim, Elokim nitzav ba'adas kel. Now ask the Mishnah, is that only when you have 10 people learning? What about if I have only 5 people learning together? Will the Shechina be present there as well? And the Mishnah says yes. We have a pasuk in Sefer Amos that assures us that if 5 people are learning together, the Shechina will be present as well. Then the Mishnah goes further. Minayin afilu shlosha. How do I know that even if 3 people are learning Torah together, that the Shechina will be there? To which it quotes a pasuk, Bekerev Elokim Yishpot, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be present when 3 people are studying Torah together as well. Minayin afilu shnayim. How do I know even if I have 2 people who are sitting together as chavrusas and they're learning Torah with one another? How do I know that the Torah is there? To that the Mishnah quotes a pasuk in Sefer Malachi that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be present there as well. And now comes the final question of the Mishnah. Uminayin afilu echad. How do I know even if only one individual sits and learns Torah by him or herself? How do I know that the Shechina will be present as they are learning Torah as well? To which the Mishnah quotes a pasuk in Sefer Shemos, B'chol hamakom asher azkir es shemi, avo elecha uverachticha. Wherever my name is mentioned, I will be responsive, I will be attentive, I will be a part of that experience. And from here the Mishnah learns that the Shechina is always present with the one who learns Torah. Now the Binyan Sion, Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, asks a very obvious question, and that is, well, why do we daven every day? V'sechazena einenu b'shuvcha l'tzion berachamim. Why do we ask that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bring His Shechina back to Eretz Yisrael with a Beis Hamikdash if we already have the experience here? If I sit down and I learn by myself in my house, on my couch, in my study, and I can already have the opportunity to experience the Shekhinah, then why do I need to daven that we should be restored to this experience of Shekhinah in Beis HaMikdash and Yerushalayim? I have the Shekhinah regardless. So what is the reason for that request? Explains the Binyan Sion that obviously there's a major difference. And the truth is this can be found in the Orach Chaim HaKadosh as well. And that is, when we talk about Shekhinah and the presence of Shekhinah, so the Binyan Sion explains that there's a different degree of potency that one can experience Shekhinah. If you have 10 people learning together, there will be a greater presence of Shekhinah, a greater measure or degree of Shekhinah that will be there. If you have 5 people, yes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will participate, but he will not be as potent, it will not be as strongly felt as he would otherwise be if there were 10 people learning. Writes the Binyan Sion, even if one person learns Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there, but as you go higher and higher, that becomes intensified. It becomes enhanced. And therefore he says, the greatest and the most ultimate experience that any of us can imagine would be the most powerful presence of Shekhinah, which is when we have a Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim once again. That is the ultimate, that's what we look forward to, and that is the experience that we daven for every day. So leaving that observation aside, there is a different, very important observation to make, and this is one that is made by both the Noam Elimelech, Rabbi Elimelech Milezhensk, who was one of the great Hasidic Rebbes, as well as the Nefesh HaChaim, Reb Chaim Volozhiner, who was one of the great Talmidim, or probably the most famous Talmud of the Vilna Gaon. So two very different schools of thought, two very different perspectives, both have the same observation in this Mishnah, and that is, if you read carefully what the Mishnah quotes from the Pasuk in Sefer Shemos, how do I know that if one person is learning Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be there and present with him or her? How do I know that to be the case? Because the Pasuk says, B'chal hamakom asher azkir es shemi. Listen carefully. Wherever I will mention my name, avo elecha uverachticha, I will participate. Now they both ask a very obvious question. You don't have to be a great expert in the Hebrew language to know that that is the wrong word to be chosen here. It's not B'chal hamakom asher azkir es shemi. It should have read, B'chal hamakom asher tazkir, or tazkiru. Wherever you will mention my name, I, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will then respond, I will then react, and I will participate with you. Why does the Pasuk use the terminology, B'chal hamakom asher azkir es shemi? Wherever I will use my name, I will participate. Explains Reb Chaim Volozhiner as well as the Noam Elimelech so beautifully, and this is just such a moving perspective that should elevate our experience of Talmud Torah whenever we do it. Sometimes we're down, and certainly during isolation we feel I'm learning alone and I can't go to the shiur that I normally went to, and I can't go to all the different programs, and it's nice to be on Zoom and it's nice to be on a virtual platform, and learning Torah is always special, but sometimes I feel I'm doing it myself, and what's my push, what's my impetus? Always remember that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there, but not just there. Says the Noam Elimelech and Reb Chaim Volozhiner. B'chal hamakom asher azkir es shemi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, not only am I present, but I'm saying the words along with you. Just imagine for a moment what that means. I sit and I come home after a long day of work, and I really just have so little energy left, and I really don't know how I'm going to sit there in front of a Gemara, how I'm going to sit there in front of a Mishnah, how I'm going to sit there in front of my Chumash and just go over the Parsha and be Mavir Sedra and say my Tehillim or whatever it might be, some kind of connection to Talmud Torah that I have after a long day of work, and it's difficult for me. Just remember to yourself, not only is HaKadosh Baruch Hu sitting there and participating with you, which is enough to make us feel elevated, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to sit there and say every word along with you. What an amazingly powerful insight. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says every word along with me. He is my chavrusa. Hashem tzilcha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going along. He's my shadow. He's mirroring, he's echoing every single word that I say. He's along with me, and he's holding my hand through this experience of Talmud Torah. How uplifting is that, and how it changes the attitude and perspective that we need to have as we engage every time with the unbelievable experience of Talmud Torah. The Chafetz Chaim has an amazing passage in his Sefer on Chumash where he says, Kama me'ushar chayiv adam lihios. How satisfied, how gratified a person needs to be. V'kamar shafar chelko ba'olam hazeh, and how grateful I need to be for how many blessings I've been given in this world. Why? Shenitna biyado hayecholes lihidavig bo yizbarach kan ba'olam hazeh. Understand for a moment what it means. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me the opportunity to connect and to be associated with Him anytime I choose to do so in Olam Hazeh. Writes the Chafetz Chaim, most people live life and don't fully appreciate or understand what great and how lucky they are for that incredible gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives all of us. But says the Chafetz Chaim, I, at any point of any day, have the opportunity to engage with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to unite with Him through the venue of Talmud Torah. Says the Chafetz Chaim, there are going to be so many people who will have the opportunity to meet HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who will have that privilege to be in very close proximity to Him. But writes the Chafetz Chaim, that's going to be in the Olam HaEmes. And there, says the Chafetz Chaim, there are going to be machitzos, rabos, mafridos, beino lebein HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are going to be so many blockades and so many barriers. I can just think, I guess in layman's terms, think about, you go to a sports event, a sports arena, and you buy a ticket. So yes, are you in the arena? You're there. Are you feeling the experience? Yes, you are there. Yes, you're a part of it. But there's a reason why the courtside seats are far more expensive. There's a reason why somebody who gets the seat right by the dugout pays a lot more for that seat, because they're much more involved. They're much closer to all the action. They have a more deep and keen understanding of exactly what's going on at the moment. And they're not just going to be a bystander who sits in the bleachers. I'm going to be intimately involved in all that goes on. Think about those who participated in the Siyam HaShas wherever in the world you may have been. I could have bought a ticket and sat all the way in the back row, all the way on top, and I watched everything that was going on, but I wasn't as closely involved as those people who had the seats on the field or who had the seats closer to where all the action was. There's a reason why people pay more for that, says the Chafetz Chaim. When we get to the Olam HaEmes, it is true. We're going to have the opportunity to spend time with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shanen miziv hashchina, that's what Olam Haba is all about. We have the opportunity to be graced by the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but he says there will be so many barriers in between ourselves and the Ribono Shel Olam. How blessed we are, says the Chafetz Chaim, that in Olam Hazeh there are no barriers. I can bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu straight into my life, into my existence, into my experience. And this is something, says the Chafetz Chaim, I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to be frightened. In the Olam HaEmes, everyone is going to be scared. What's HaKadosh Baruch Hu going to ask me? Maybe he's going to scrutinize every single thing I've done in my life. Here, says the Chafetz Chaim, obviously there's a din v'cheshbon, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is watching, but I have the opportunity to engage with the Ribono Shel Olam at any time that I want and invite Him into the experience of my learning and the experience of my life. How lucky we are, how blessed we need to feel, and how gratified we should all feel that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us this tremendous opportunity. On top of the obligation that we have of Limud HaTorah, of learning Torah, we also have a mitzvah to master and to absorb the Torah that we study. And that is something that is expressed very clearly in the Shulchan Aruch Harav, which is written by the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, has a section on Hilchos Talmud Torah. And there he goes so far as to say, we have an obligation not only to learn Torah, but to master Torah and to retain the information that we study. And says the Baal HaTanya, therefore, if I feel I don't have the ability to do it on my own, chayiv hu min haTorah liskor lo melamed sheyilamdenu heitev. I have to find a Rebbe that will teach me. And that means I even have to be willing to invest money to be able to provide myself with that opportunity of having somebody who can teach me Torah with clarity. Now, what does it mean? What kind of teacher should I be looking for? There are all kinds of speakers and teachers out there in the world, but says the Baal HaTanya, when you're trying to narrow down for yourself who it is that you should be highlighting in your life to be your teacher of Torah, says the Baal HaTanya, you have to find someone that is going to teach you Leidat Kol HaTorah Shebechsav V'Shebal Peh. You have to find a teacher that will teach with clarity to the point that you will have such an understanding that you will know and you will be able to retain the information as best as you can. So much so, there's a Gemara in Maseches Menachos that learns from a pasuk in Parshas Ve'eschanan that there is actually a lo saseh Shabbat for those who forget their learning. Hishamar lecha u'shmar nafshecha miyod pen tishkach es hadavar asher ro'u einecha upen yasiru milavavcha yom asher amadata lefnei Hashem Elokecha b'chorev. And the Gemara learns from there, Menachos Tzadites, that we have an obligation not only to learn Torah, but we have an obligation to master and retain the Torah that we study. So much so that the Gemara says, Kol ha'mashakeach davar echad mitalmudo over belav. If somebody forgets some of the Torah that they have studied, they violate a lo saseh in the Torah. And it goes so extreme that the Mishnah writes in Pirkei Avos as well, Paragimel Mishnah Ches, Reb Meir Omer Kol hashokeach davar echad mi mishnaso male alav hakasav ki'ilu mischayev benafsho. What a frightening statement. And it seems like something that's almost unreasonable for us to live up to. Does the Torah really expect that all of us are going to remember everything that we learn, everything that we study? This is an amazing tshuva in the Chacham Tzvi. Chacham Tzvi, one of the greatest gedolim, one of the tshuva svarim that we rely on in so many areas of halacha. Chacham Tzvi writes that, as we know, an avel is aser b'talmud Torah. Avel is not allowed to learn Torah. Why? Because there's an assumption. B'kudei Hashem yishar misamchei leiv. When we learn Torah, we're excited and we celebrate as we learn Torah, and it puts us in a jovial and a happy mood. And an avel, as we know, is not supposed to be feeling those kinds of sensations, and therefore we're concerned that if an avel is going to engage in Talmud Torah, it's going to lead them to have too much simcha during a time when it's not appropriate to do so. Therefore, the general assumption is that an avel aser b'Talmud Torah. This is why on Tisha B'Av we refrain from learning Torah, because it is something that will put us in a happy mood, and on Tisha B'Av that is obviously not the appropriate mood for all of us to be in. We're supposed to be a little bit somber, we're supposed to be subdued during Avelus and during Tisha B'Av, and therefore we assume that Talmud Torah is something that is limited, that is restricted, because of Pikudei Hashem Yisharim Misamchei Leiv. Now the Chacham Tzvi wondered, let's say you have somebody who every day has some kind of program where they review the Mishnayos that they've learned, and it's a whole system that they have, and they're concerned, if I'm going to go a week of Shiva without reviewing and doing my whole system, I'm going to forget that which I have studied. Says the Chacham Tzvi, although the halacha generally is Pekudei Hashem Yishar Misamchei Leiv, and therefore an avel is not allowed to engage in Talmud Torah, if somebody is concerned that they're going to forget their learning by not studying Torah during Avelus, they are allowed to do so. That is a tshuva in the Chacham Tzvi, and it just shows how important it is. Writes the Chacham Tzvi, what's the reason for my argument? Why do I allow this? So he says the reason why is because we know that during Shiva, although a person is not allowed to engage in certain activities, if it's a davar ha'aved, if it's something that is going to be a loss forever, then that is something that an avel perhaps is allowed to find a leniency to engage in. And therefore, says the Chacham Tzvi, Ein lecha davar ha'aved gadol mizeh. There is nothing that could be more catastrophic of a loss to a person than for them to forget their learning. And therefore, he says, an avel who is concerned that by not engaging in Talmud Torah during the week is going to forget the Torah that they learned, they have every right to be engaged in Talmud Torah. Now, it happens to be there's a discussion amongst the Rishonim. Why is there a prohibition to forget our learning? Why do we get so carried away? Why are we so upset about somebody who forgets their learning that they were engaged in? Not everybody can remember. Why is there a problem? And Rabbeinu Yonah explains the reason why is because we're concerned. If somebody's going to learn Torah and they're not going to remember it with clarity, they're not going to remember the details, then we're concerned that they're going to say that something is mutter or perhaps something is aser, and that is an inappropriate thing to say when perhaps it is the other way around. Now, I've always found it interesting that Rabbeinu Yonah says it in both directions. He says the person will come lesser es hamuter, ulahatir es ha'aser. Rabbeinu Yonah says you're going to inappropriately tell somebody that this is aser when really it was mutter. And on the flip side, you're going to tell somebody that this was mutter when in fact it was aser. And both of those are a problem. Says Rabbeinu Yonah, we have to make sure that we remember and we retain our learning Torah, because otherwise we're going to make a mistake. Now the problem with that, Rabbeinu Yonah, is that it would seem that that is only limited to somebody who gives a psak halacha. Many people, when they have a shaila, ask somebody who's more knowledgeable than they are. They don't answer the shaila on their own. So does that mean that this prohibition does not apply to them? Does it mean that they're allowed to forget all of the Torah that they studied because, after all, what's the problem? I'm never going to paskin a shaila anyway. So number one, all of us end up making decisions in halacha at some point. Yes, when it's a major shaila that we believe to be a major shaila, we ask. But when there's something that's a day-to-day routine, part of our lives as Jews, we think we know the answers and perhaps we're not remembering correctly how we're supposed to behave. So that's number one. But number two, and more importantly, the Rashbeitz, who's from the family of the Ramban, he lived in the 1300s. The Rashbeitz writes that he believes that this is not contingent. He thinks that the reason why there's a prohibition to forget our learning that we study is an intrinsic prohibition. Not because I'm going to make a mistake in the way that I practice my Judaism, not in the way that I perform a mitzvah, not in the way that I paskin a shaila, but rather he says inherently, it's not contingent on the fact that I'm going to paskin a shaila, it's rather an inherent isser. Why? Because the Torah should be so exciting. It should be such an important part of our lives. How could I forget anything? Would you ever forget your own birthday, your own social security number? Would you ever forget your Tudat Zehut? Would you forget anything that is of such importance to you, your anniversary, your children's names? Would you forget that? Absolutely not. Says the Rashbeitz, then how can you ever forget a word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah? It is so important. It is so, at least of equal or more importance, like everything else that we just mentioned. How can a person ever forget that? I would never forget to do anything else in my life that is of such great import. How could I forget one word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah? You know, I've always wondered. You go into some of these department stores, and I only know what they are in America, but I know this program is being broadcast in all different corners of the globe, so I don't know how to translate this into other communities. But I know here in America, when I need some kind of appliance, I go into a store called Lowe's, or I go into Home Depot. And you have this huge inventory. You go into a store, a person like me who doesn't know how to find anything in a store like that, immediately finds an individual who works there, asks them for some assistance, and I ask the person, can you show me, where do I find this kind of screw? I'm trying to build something and I need this kind of screw, I need this kind of appliance, something tiny, something very small, I would never be able to find it. Within moments, the person who is at the other end of the store is able to direct me. Go to aisle 57. If you look on the top shelf in the third row over, you will see exactly the item that you're looking for. I always found that to be so surprising. How could it be that every person that is hired by Lowe's or Home Depot is a brilliant human being? How could it be that all of them are such geniuses that the minute you ask them a question about any item in the store, they seem to know the answer immediately without even having to look it up? How could that be? How could that be? Are they all that smart? Are they all that brilliant? I don't believe so. Maybe many of them are. But I believe the answer is they know that their job depends on it. They know that if they cannot provide the answers to those kinds of questions, it is so important to their profession, to their job, that there is no option but to remember all of that information and to know it with clarity and to get it right every time. It is important enough to them because this is their life. This is our life. This is the highlight of our life. Taras Hashem temima meshivas nafesh. Pekudei Hashem yishar mesamchei lev. Sas anochi alam rasecha kimotzei shalal rav. This is our life. This is what I'm held accountable for. And therefore, says the Rashbeitz, it is intrinsically a problem for a person to forget their Torah. It shows that I don't value it enough. I don't forget my birthday. I don't forget my anniversary. I don't forget my children's names. I don't forget to eat breakfast, lunch, or supper. I do all the things that a person needs to know or do throughout the course of a day. Well then, I also need to make sure that I don't forget my learning, because that is what defines my essence. That is who I am. There's a Mishnah in the second parak in Pirkei Avos. Chamisha Talmidim Hayel Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. There were 5 very outstanding students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And there it says that the Mishnah lists all of their great attributes. Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkanis, Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, Rabbi Yossi HaKohen, Rabbi Shimon ben Asanov, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. Hu hayamona shivchan. It says that they used to talk about how great each of these students were, and they said something very positive about each one. Well, says the Mishnah, when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai used to talk about his great towering student, Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkanus, he used to say about him that he is a bar sid she'eno ma'abe tipa. He is such an outstanding genius. He has so much brilliance. There is nothing that he has ever forgotten. He is a bar sid. He is like a pit that has cemented walls, she'eno ma'abe tipa, that not one drop of water ever leaves that pit because it is so solidified. This man, Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkanus, was such a genius. He was such a towering figure. He never forgot anything. Never. Now, Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkanus never forgot anything. That is not something to pride him on. What did he do to get himself there? Nothing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him that gift. The Ribbon Shalom made him have a photographic memory, made him remember everything that he ever heard. He made him have this unbelievable wealth of knowledge. Why is that a way to praise Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkanus? What did he invest to have that great talent, that great gift? Absolutely nothing. And therefore the question that bothers many of the Mefarshim is, why is that a way to praise Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkanus if he did nothing to deserve it, if he did nothing to have that gift? And the answer, I saw Rabbi Ovadia Yosef has in his set of Pirkei Avos. It's called Anaf Eitz Avos. It's not a set, it's one volume, but it's part of a bigger set of beautiful svarim of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. And the Tiferes Yisrael writes a similar idea, and that is that Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkanus, if you look in the Medrash, it seems he was not born a genius. Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkanus did not do this just because he was a brilliant human being. Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkanus loved the Torah so much. He had such an interest in investing of himself and giving every moment of his life to master and study and understand and retain all that information, that in the end he did. It was not a talent that was given to him at birth. It was not something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu bestowed him with when he was born. It is something that he came to throughout his life because he cared so much, because he loved it so much, because it was his lifeblood, because he knew this is the only way to live life as a Torah Jew. And it meant enough to him that he would never dare forget anything that he studied. And that is why Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said about him that he was a bar sid she'eno ma'abe tipa. This was something that he developed. It was something that he deserved on his own. It was not a God-given talent. It was something that he worked toward because he cared enough to have that. When the Torah says the description of what it means to be a Lomed HaTorah, we know that it is described as something that is mesukim midvash v'nofes tzufim. Learning Torah is something that is sweeter than honey. It is something that is so delectable. It is so exciting. And the Chafetz Chaim asks, what do you mean it's mesukim midvash? Why is it sweeter than honey? Explains the Chafetz Chaim, sometimes when you eat candy, sometimes when you eat something sweet, it tastes good and it's exciting. But too many lollipops, too much candy, at some point we don't enjoy it anymore. Too much honey, at some point it's not something that excites us. But here by Torah, the more you have, it's mesukim midvash. The more you have, the more you enjoy it. The more you enjoy it, the more you want to have that experience again and again. What's strange is when it comes to the description of Eretz Yisrael, so there, the description seems to be a little bit backwards. There it says it's an Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash. Over here, when we talk about the experience of Talmud Torah, it's a little bit different. The way the Navi describes it is that it is something that is first the Dvash, and then we talk about the Chalav, as the Navi says, Dvash v'chalav tachas l'shonech. Why do we have that change? Why do we have that difference? Why, when Eretz Yisrael is described, is it Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash? When we talk about the experience of Talmud Torah, it is something that is Dvash v'chalav tachas l'shonech. And Rav Asher Weiss once told me, perhaps the reason why is because when we want to explain the great virtue of Eretz Yisrael, the great value of the land, we say it has all the essentials. It has chalav. And on top of that, it also has the extra. It also has the sweetness. It also has all the things that we don't necessarily need, but that will also enhance our lives. That is the way that we need to approach our life in Eretz Yisrael. When we talk about the experience of Talmud Torah, the most important thing that we need to stress before anything else is the dvash, is the sweetness. Harivna Hashem Elokeinu as divrei Torascha b'finu. More important than anything else, if we want to master Torah, if we want to be successful in our study of Torah, if we want to fully understand that which we learn, then we need to first have that excitement. We need to first have that appreciation for what Talmud Torah is all about. Only then can we then move further and say, we also will go and work hard and have the chalav and have the essentials and make sure to understand as best as we can. But the only way to ensure that we will have that experience is to first assure ourselves, dvash v'chalav tachas l'shonech. We need to love it. We need to appreciate it. We need to understand how lucky we are to have this unbelievable experience of Talmud Torah in our lives, like the Chafetz Chaim said. And it is only then that we will be able to then go to the next step, which is to master, to retain, and to be proficient in all areas of Torah study that are relevant and important to our lives. I thank you all for listening. I wish all of you a good Yantif, a Chag Sameach, and this Simchas HaTorah should be one where we once again redouble our efforts and dedication to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah and to ourselves. That we should just have a pleasurable experience every time we learn Torah, and we should appreciate the great gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us to study, to master, and to live lives as Torah Jews. I wish all of you a good Yantif.